August 14th, 1942. I have deserted you for a whole month, but honestly, there's so little news here that I can't find amusing things to tell you every day. The Van Dans arrived on July 13th. We thought they were coming on the 14th. Between the 13th and the 16th of July, the Germans called up people right and left, which created more and more unrest, so they played for safety. Better a day too early than a day too late. At 9:30 in the morning, we were still having breakfast. Peter arrived, the Van Dan's son, not 16 yet, a rather soft, shy, gawky youth. Can't expect much from his company. He brought his cat, Mooshy, with him. Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan arrived half an hour later, and to our great amusement, she had a large potty in her hat box. "I don't feel at home anywhere without my chamber," she declared, so it was the first thing to find its permanent resting place under her divan. Mr. Van Daan did not bring his, but carried a folding tea table under his arm. From the day that they arrived, we all had meals cozily together, and after 3 days, it was just as if we were one large family. Naturally, the Van Dans were able to tell us a lot about the extra week they had spent in the inhabited world. Among other things, we were very interested to hear what had happened to our house and to Mr. Goudsmit. Mr. Van Daan told us. Mr. Goudsmit phoned at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and asked if I could come around. I went immediately and found G in a state of great agitation. He let me read a letter that the Franks had left behind and wanted to take the cat to the neighbors as indicated in the letter, which pleased me. Mr. G was afraid that the house would be searched, so we went through all the rooms, tidied up a bit, and cleared away the breakfast things. Suddenly, I discovered a writing pad on Mr. Frank's desk with an address in Mashit written on it. Although I knew that this was done on purpose, I pretended to be very surprised and shocked and urged Mr. G to tear up this unfortunate little piece of paper without delay. I went on pretending that I knew nothing of your disappearance all the time, but after seeing the paper, I got a brainwave. "Mr. Goudsmit," I said, "it suddenly dawns on me what this address may be referred to. Now it all comes back to me. A high-ranking officer was in the office about 6 months ago, and he appeared to be very friendly with Mr. Frank and offered to help him should the need arise. He was stationed in Mesquite. I think he must have kept his word and somehow or other managed to get them into Belgium and then on to Switzerland. I should tell this to any friends who may inquire. Don't, of course, mention the Mesquite." With these words, I left the house. Most of your friends know already because I've told myself several times by different people. We were highly amused at the story, and when Mr. Van Daan gave us further details, laughed still more at the way people can let their imagination run away with him. One family had seen the pair of us pass on bicycles very early in the morning, and another lady knew quite definitely that we were fetched by a military car in the middle of the night, but they all were wrong. Yours, Anne. Friday, August 21st, 1942. Dear Kitty, the entrance to our hiding place has now been properly concealed. Mr. Krayler thought it would be better to put a cupboard in front of our door because a lot of houses are being searched for hidden bicycles. But of course, it had to be a movable cupboard that can open like a door. Mr. Vossen made the whole thing. We were already let into the secret, and he can't do enough to help. If we want to go downstairs, we have to first bend down and then jump because the Tep has gone. The first 3 days, we were all going about with masses of lumps on our foreheads because we kept knocking ourselves against the low doorway. Now we have nailed a cloth filled with wood wool against the top of the door. Let's see if that helps. I'm not working much at present. I'm giving myself holidays until September. Then Daddy is going to give me lessons. It's shocking how much school I have forgotten already. There is little change in our life here. Hey, guess what? So she had to quit going to school just like we did, okay? So it kind of stinks. And so she just decided like, hey, I'm going to just like not do any of my lessons, but sorry, y'all don't get that choice, okay? Mr. Van Dan and I usually manage to upset each other. It's just the opposite with Margot, whom he likes very much. Mummy sometimes treats me just like a baby, which I can't bear. Otherwise, things are going better. I still don't like Peter anymore. He is so boring. He just flops lazily on his bed half the time, does a bit of carpentry, then goes back into bed for another snooze. What a fool! It's lovely weather, and in spite of everything, we make the most we can of it by lying on a camp bed in the attic where the sun shines through an open window. Yours, Anne. So they've kind of noticed that this boy, Peter, he was a teenager. He was almost 16, which is some of y'all's age. That it sounds like he doesn't do much during the day and he just sleeps a lot. And maybe you guys have maybe you guys are sleeping a lot during the quarantine, or maybe you have brothers or sisters that are staying in bed, or they stay up all night and sleep a lot. That's kind of what my kids are doing. Wednesday, September 2nd, 1942. Dear Kitty, Mr. and Mrs. Van Dan had a terrible quarrel. And a quarrel means a fight. So the Mr. and Mrs. Van Dan, who were married, had a big old fight. And that happens to lots of mamas and dads in quarantine. They fight. Oh, it's just normal, okay? I've never seen anything quite like it before. Mummy and Daddy would never dream of shouting at each other. The cause was so trivial that the whole thing was just a pure waste of breath. But still, everyone to his own liking. Naturally, it is very unpleasant for Peter, who has to stand by. No one takes him seriously. He is so frightfully touchy and lazy. Yesterday, he was badly upset because he found that his tongue was blue instead of red. This unusual phenomenon of nature disappeared as quickly as it had come. Today, he is going about with a scarf on, as he has a stiff neck. In addition to my lord complains of lumbago, pains round the heart, kidneys and lungs are not unusual either. He is a real hypochondriac. That's the word for such people, isn't it? It's not all honey between Mommy and Mrs. Van Dan. There is plenty of cause for unpleasantness. Mrs. Van Dan, to give an example, has taken all 3 of her sheets out of the common linen cupboard. She takes it for granted that Mummy's sheets will do for all of us. It will be a nasty surprise for her when she finds that Mummy has followed her good example. Although she is thoroughly piqued that her dinner service and not ours is in use, she is always trying to find out where we actually put our plates. They are closer than she thinks. They are in a cardboard box behind a lot and the junk in the attics. Our plates are ungettable as long as we are here, and a good thing too. I always have bad luck. I smashed one of Mrs. Van Dan's soup plates into 1,000 pieces yesterday. Oh, she cried angrily. Couldn't you be more careful for once? That's the last one I've got. Mr. Van Dan is all sugar nowadays. Long may it last. Mummy gave me another frightful sermon this morning, and I can't bear them. Our ideas are completely opposite. Daddy is a darling, although he can sometimes be angry with me for 5 minutes on end. Last week, we were a little interrupted in our monotonous life, and it was over a book about women and Peter. First, I must tell you that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books that Mr. Kufius lends us, but the grown-ups held back this particular book on the subject of women. Peter's curiosity was aroused at once. Why was it that the two of them were not allowed to read this book? He got a hold of the book while his mom was downstairs talking and disappeared with his booty to the attic. All went well for a few days, and his mother knew what he was doing but didn't tell tales until father found out. He was really angry, took the book away, and thought that would finish the whole business. However, he had not allowed for his son's curiosity, which waxed rather than waned because of his father's attitude. Peter, determined to finish it, thought a way to get a hold of this enthralling book. In the meantime, Miss Van Daan had asked Mommy what she thought about it. Mommy thought this particular book was not suitable for Margot, but saw no harm in letting her read most of the books. So anyway, guys, it's kind of like what happens in most families in quarantine. They were all kind of bickering. They were all kind of fighting. They were getting on each other's nerves, but they kind of have to learn to live together. Okay, and that's kind of what happens with us during quarantine. We might get mad, but you can't stay mad all night, okay, at your brothers, your sisters, your mom and dad. And you got to understand, they may fight, they may yell at you, but it's just because we're all cooped up in the house together, day in and day out, just like Anne and Frank, all right? It's all going to be okay, all right? We're going to get out of this soon. Good night.